Part 11. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 101. Little guy, are you satisfied with my reception this time? Seeing you in such a mess makes me really happy. The third elder stood in the sky, his eyes fixed on Lin Yu in front of him, and there was a hint of sneer at the corner of his mouth. At this time, Lin Yu had a look of reluctance on his face, his eyes seemed to be a bit cold, and his expression was filled with a cold and murderous intention between his brows. Although I have to admit, old guy, your strength is indeed not weak, but so what? Today I really don't believe it, I can't kill you. Lin Yu gritted his teeth and spoke every word. The eyes of the third elder Taizhang were full of mockery. You have to have that kind of ability to kill me. Don't blame me for looking down on you, little guy, even if I stand here now, with your current strength, I'm afraid there's nothing you can do. The third elder Taizhang crossed his arms, with a slight sneer on his lips. Of course he had absolute confidence in himself, and this confidence came from his own strength. At this moment, Lin Yu suddenly smiled like this. He smiled happily, as if he had seen the most happy thing in the world. Ha ha ha, why can't you? It's simply ridiculous to say it. Lin Yu made a sudden gesture with both hands. At this time, the mark in his hand formed quickly, and a violent force burst out from Lin Yu's palm. The force gradually moved towards the void, this time erratic. This power is mysterious, and mysterious, after this power envelops the space-time beast. At this time, the space beast suddenly began to grow in size. In just a moment, in just this breath, the space beast suddenly moved towards the dragon spirit. Photographed here. His palms carried endless power, and the surrounding world trembled faintly. This majestic and vast power seemed to be somewhat extraordinary. The ancient power between heaven and earth came quietly like this, and even the dragon spirit couldn't help but start to look ugly after feeling this power. This swaying power made everyone's minds tremble. Even the third elder Taizhang couldn't help but feel a little panic in his heart after he felt this power. He said, slightly frowning, something complicated seemed to flash through his eyes. Interesting, it's really interesting. At this time, the third elder Taizhang suddenly took a step forward. At this moment, he was just about to use his magical power when Lin Yu saw the dragon spirit above his head. Extraordinary beast, Lord of the Divine Dragon Spirit Domain Level 9, Level 49. Qualification, Alien, Advanced. Life, 999999999. Speed, 999999999. Defense, 999999999. Attack, 999999999. Skills, Dragon's Tail Swing, Dragon's Imprisonment, Way of Heaven and Earth, Dragon's Breath, King's Destruction. Dragon swings its tail, the dragon spirit activates its skills and suddenly swings its tail, which can quickly cross the world and completely destroy it. Dragon Confinement, the spirit of the divine dragon activates skills to imprison an object in a certain period of time and space. These skills are mysterious, so they consume a lot of money. If ordinary people use them rashly, they may cause harm to others. The Way of Heaven and Earth, the dragon spirit activates skills to consult the way of heaven and earth and carry the will of heaven and earth. If the skill is used by those with insufficient cultivation, it will most likely put them in danger. Dragon Breath, the dragon spirit activates the skill and suddenly spits out a breath of hot dragon breath. This breath of hot dragon breath can burn everything in the world. King of Destruction, the dragon spirit activates skills. The ultimate skill can completely destroy a world. The scope of destruction depends on the caster and the strength of the dragon spirit itself. After Lin Yu saw this short introduction, his pupils suddenly enlarged, and a bit of disbelief flashed in his eyes. He stared at the dragon spirit, and then he couldn't help but frown slightly. How is it possible? If this power is so powerful, judging from my current strength, I may not be able to catch it. Lin Yu glanced at the third elder Taizhang again. At this time, he suddenly discovered that the connection between the third elder Taizhang and the dragon spirit was very weak. The relationship between the two was not at all like master and servant, but more like a symbiotic relationship, which means that although the three elders can drive the dragon spirit, they cannot completely subdue it. After Lin Yu thought of this, a bit of excitement flashed in his eyes, and a complicated smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. If that's the case, then it's easy to handle. The fly won't bite the seamless eggs, but there's still no problem in nailing the eggs with the seams. After Lin Yu thought of this, he suddenly took a step forward: time travel. Even the space-time beast never expected that Lin Yu would issue such an order, but after a while, the space-time beast probably understood Lin Yu's intention. Lin Yu suddenly galloped towards a certain place, and his speed was not slow. And after traveling through time and space, just in this blink of an eye, he has traveled thousands of miles. Where Lin Yu was standing originally, a huge tail suddenly passed by. Although Lin Yu was just testing at the beginning, he never expected that the strength of this big guy could reach such a powerful level. At this moment, Lin Yu suddenly took a step forward, and then he pinched his hands and chanted a spell. His speech speed was not slow. This time and space beast shuttled through time and space in a small range, and it was quite handy to use. At this moment, Lin Yu seemed to suddenly remember something. A bit of complexity flashed in his eyes, and then he couldn't help but frown slightly. No, there must be other ways to cut off the connection between them. If there is another way to cut off the connection between them, it might be easier. After thinking of this, Lin Yu raised a playful smile at the corner of his mouth. At this time, he seemed to suddenly remember something, and suddenly rushed forward. His speed was extremely fast. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Chang. Chapter 102. At this moment, Lin Yu came to a relatively safe place. He quickly entered the store and began to browse the items in the store carefully. Why is there no Tongxin 1? And at this moment, he suddenly saw a special small black grid in the last grid in the mall with a big question mark on it. The big question mark on this small black grid made Lin Yu's eyes full of doubts. At this moment, Lin Yu couldn't help but frown slightly, and something strange seemed to flash in his eyes. At this time, Lin Yu frowned slightly, and a bit of confusion flashed in his eyes. What is this small grid used for? What on earth is this? Lin Yu was full of curiosity, so at this time he gently opened the small grid. A bit of complexity flashed in his eyes, and then he couldn't help but frown slightly. When he clicked on the small box, he heard an elegant female voice suddenly spoken by the system. Congratulations to the host. The host's points have been cleared. The host has obtained the mysterious item Dragon Control Technique. The Dragon Control Technique is a one-time item. If the host uses it, he can capture a divine dragon from the Divine Dragon clan. At this time, there was a small scroll in Lin Yu's palm. This small scroll emitted a dazzling light in his palm. The dazzling brilliance shot straight into the sky, making people feel a sense of wonder. An indescribable feeling. Lin Yu looked at this small scroll and his points that had been cleared. At that time, he felt like crying without tears. At this moment, he even wanted to scold his mother. The space-time beast still led him to painstakingly travel through time and space. At this time, the speed of things was extremely fast. He shuttled freely through time and space, flashing back and forth, which made people feel a bit unpredictable. Lin Yu suddenly took a step forward from the tower, and the murderous intent in his body was clearly revealed. At this moment, he suddenly saw the small scroll in his palm, and a teasing smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. There seemed to be a hint of amusement in his eyes. Interesting. Although it is true that the points are cleared this time, which is a bit unexpected for me, it seems that this dragon control technique can subdue the spirit of this dragon. When Lin Yu thought of this, his eyes flashed with a special color. At this time, he still looked excited, with surprise in his eyes. At this time, there was a bit of helplessness in the eyes of the space-time beast, and a wry smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. He said to Lin Yu in a deep voice, "Is your excellency okay? I can't hold it any longer, I'm afraid this guy's strength is a little too strong." The third elder on the side just stood with his hands behind his back, a bit of joking flashed in his eyes, and the sneer on the corner of his mouth became more obvious. "Wasn't it awesome just now? Why is it like this now? It's really interesting to talk about. What's the difference between hiding and hiding? Anyway, I can't tell, there is no difference at all." The voice of the third elder Tai's Hang was very loud. The great elder and Master Zi Ling looked at each other. After seeing this scene, their eyes were full of helplessness, and the corners of their mouths raised a few words. A bitter smile. "What should we do now? This guy is so aggressive. If he continues like this, I'm afraid this little guy won't be able to hold on." After the third elder heard what the first elder said, the arrogance in his eyes became more obvious. "Ha ha ha, what you said is true. If it continues like this little guy will probably be completely defeated by the old man in less than a quarter of an hour. By that time, all of you will become prisoners of old age." The third elder's eyes were staring straight at the great elder, with a hint of contempt and a hint of sneer at the corner of his mouth. The great elder frowned slightly, and was sighing in his heart. At this moment, he couldn't help but look up to the sky and sigh, with a bit of helplessness flashing in his eyes. "Oh, is it possible that the Tianji sect will be destroyed today?" At this moment, the great elder also has no certainty about where he will go in Tianji. For example, in this situation, even the great elder does not know what he should do. "Little guy, this matter didn't have much to do with you in the first place, and now that you're like this, you've done your best. If you really can't hold on anymore, if you run away quickly now, you might still be able to survive. There is a glimmer of hope, but if it's too late, I'm afraid." Lin Yu just smiled. "Don't worry, I have my own sense of caution in this matter. It won't be easy for this old guy to kill me. If he wants to eat me, I'm afraid he will have to break a few pills just teeth." After Lin Yu finished speaking, he suddenly jumped up. But at this moment, they suddenly felt that there seemed to be a violent tremor in the world around them. A powerful aura came from the south of the sky. The powerful aura gave people a mysterious feeling, which suddenly aroused a bit of fear in people's hearts. At this moment, Lin Yu's eyes flashed with confusion. Impossible, how could this matter have ended up like this? That power is really a bit special. What exactly is there in this land of the south? After feeling the tremor, the third elder of the Supreme Elders suddenly showed some excitement in his eyes. "Ha ha ha, very good, this is very good. Such a big movement must have a rare treasure in the world. God bless me, God bless me." The laughter of the third elder of the Supreme Elders resounded through the world. At this time, his eyes were full of excitement, and the surprise between his eyebrows could not be concealed at all. At this time in the southern part of the sky, a man with a dragon tattooed on his shoulder, followed by a mute, and behind him were a man and a woman. The man looked quite rough, and the woman was born with red lips and white teeth. At this time, they looked at the scene in front of them, and their eyes couldn't help but flash a little horror. The undead army. This is the undead army in the legend. The legendary three-headed hellhound guards the gate of hell's reincarnation and can summon countless undead armies for its own use. Could it be that the three-headed hellhound is here now? If so, then this situation is probably quite tricky. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 103. Lu Chen saw the mute's gesture, and after a slight hesitation, he followed the mute forward. Hu Tianyi and the others also wanted to follow, but Lu Chen turned around and glanced at them. This is the army of the undead. You'd better not follow them. Just wait and see what happens. Hu Tianyi and the others looked at each other, but if you say it yourself, I'm afraid. Lu Chen smiled, it doesn't matter, I have my own sense of discretion, you don't need to worry about this. Hu Tianyi nodded slightly, okay. These undead armies were wearing armor, and the leader was riding a tall horse. The man on top of the tall horse was holding a simple sword and stood in a peerless manner, looking very majestic and at ease. After Lu Chen saw this scene, his heart couldn't help but tremble slightly. A complicated look flashed in his eyes, it's quite interesting. At this time, the little mute also had a look of panic on his face. Lu Chen had a premonition based on his intuition that this seemed to be something bad. He half closed his eyes. Mute, you mean there is danger ahead, right? The mute nodded quickly. Then you stay here first, I'll go see what's going on in front first. The mute shook his head, grabbed Lu Chen's arm, and finally waved his hand like this, seeming to signal Lu Chen not to do this. You told me not to go there, right? But if I don't go there now, then I'm afraid. The little mute pointed to the side. Lu Chen glanced to the side and realized that there seemed to be a very special thing next to the little mute. It was like a knife, but it was long and narrow and looked like a knife. A sword, but it was sharpened on one side. You mean take this? The little mute nodded slightly. Lu Chen took the knife, and he just saw 3 big characters engraved on the handle of the knife, Dragon Song Knife. These 3 characters are written in seal script, and the writing is vigorous and powerful. You can tell at a glance that they were not written by ordinary people. Lu Chen raised the knife, and then swung it forward suddenly, with a bit of satisfaction flashing in his eyes. Yes, it is indeed a good knife. But after hearing the sound, the undead army suddenly turned its head. The eyes of the undead army were staring at Lu Chen, with a bit of fierceness in their eyes. Lu Chen suddenly turned his head and glanced towards the general, with a cold light flashing in his eyes. The general's eyes were also fixed on Lu Chen. The two met each other's eyes, and a burst of sparks burst out. The general picked up the knife and pulled the horse, and suddenly rushed towards Lu Kang. This Lu Chen was not a kind person. He suddenly turned slightly sideways, and then dodged the general's knife. Then he turned around and kicked the general on the chest. The general suddenly took several steps back before he managed to stabilize his body. The general let out a low roar, "Kill." The sound coming from the general's throat was quite strange, but what probably surprised Lu Chen more was that he could actually kick this general. You must know that this general should be a dead soul and should not have a physical body, but now this general actually has a real form. Lu Chen's pupils suddenly enlarged, and a bit of disbelief flashed in his eyes, and then he couldn't help but frown slightly. How is it possible? What is going on with this general? Why does he have a real form? Lu Chen suddenly smelled a fishy and unpleasant smell, and then countless armies rushed towards him, and then countless undead armies suddenly rushed towards Lu Kang. A slight sneer appeared at the corner of Lu Chen's mouth, and a flash of contempt flashed in his eyes. Just because you are trying to trouble me, you are just talking nonsense. Lu Chen stood there with one sword, as if he were the peerless god of war. His eyes seemed a bit cold at this moment. The countless undead army suddenly rushed towards Lu Chen, with a face full of panic. Although he was extremely frightened at the moment, he did not take half a step back. The mute suddenly waved his arms, but his hands actually passed through the bodies of these undead armies. After Lu Chen saw this scene, he finally understood why the mute let himself hold a dragon's chanting knife. It turned out that this dragon's chanting knife could communicate with ghosts and gods, and it could also kill ghosts and gods. Lu Chen suddenly moved forward, walking like this, facing thousands of troops and horses alone. When he entered the midst of thousands of troops and horses, It was like entering an uninhabited land. But even though he was stronger than him, he still had a few faint scratches on his body. These scars, at this time, although he had the courage to be unstoppable, he would inevitably make mistakes, and the wounds on his body became more and more serious. More and more, blood flowed faintly from the wound. After seeing this scene, the mute's eyes were full of anxiety. Although Lu Chen saw the scars all over his body at this moment, his face did not show any fear. He laughed loudly at this moment. Ha ha ha, it's just that, that's all. What can 1,000 troops do? Look at me, I can defeat them with one force. After Lu Chen finished speaking, he rushed out suddenly. His speed was extremely fast. He came in just one breath and one breath. When he was in front of a person, he suddenly raised his sword and swung it. The dragon song sword actually made a faint sound of dragon roar. And at this moment, after the undead army heard the faint dragon roar on the dragon chant knife, they suddenly knelt down on one knee, with a kind of piety in their eyes. After Lu Chen saw this scene, he couldn't help but frown slightly, and something complicated seemed to flash in his eyes. How is that possible? At this moment, the general who was riding on the tall horse actually dismounted, lifted his robes, and knelt on the ground. Lu Chen turned his head and glanced at the mute. Do you know what is going on? The mute waved his hand and shook his head. His eyes seemed to be quite confused. At this moment, Lu Chen couldn't help but smile slightly. Interesting, but in that case, it seems that we have passed this level. Lu Chen suddenly stepped forward, the little mute pointed behind him, and Lu Chen suddenly slapped his forehead. Look at my memory, why have I forgotten all this matter? Now let's go and call them all over. Then we'll go together. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 104. At this time, Lu Chen said, still not forgetting to look at the sword Long Yin in his hand. His eyes were quite satisfied, and then he couldn't help but nodded slightly. When they turned back again, several gloomy eyes in the distance were staring directly at their backs. The eyes looking at them were quite cold, and there was a hint of ulterior meaning in their expressions. Color. At this moment, Lin Yu was standing in the sky. He looked at the slightly distorted facial features of the third elder, and a sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth. Third elder, I don't want to play with you anymore. It's a mule or a horse out for a walk. Lin Yu's eyes were fixed on the third elder, a cold light flashed in his eyes, and all the murderous intent in his body was revealed. When the third elder saw Lin Yu in this state, his fists clenched and he gritted his teeth every word. I didn't expect that you, a mere brat, would actually dare to yell at me. Since you want to die, if I don't succeed, you will be quite unjustified. I will kill you today. After the third elder Tais Hang finished speaking, he jumped up suddenly, and then rushed out in the distance. His speed was extremely fast. Just between breath and breath, already sitting astride the dragon's head. Standing on top of the dragon's head, the third elder Tais Hang had a slight chuckle on his lips, and there was even a hint of amusement in his eyes. It's interesting, it's really interesting. I think you should be satisfied if you die under the divine dragon spirit's way of heaven and earth. When Lin Yu heard this, after the third elder Tais Hang finished speaking, his pupils suddenly enlarged. The way of heaven and earth, this trick is very powerful. I am just afraid that if you fail to steal the chicken, you will lose all the rice. I lost my wife and lost my troops. Lin Yu's tone was neither urgent nor slow. After hearing what he said, the third elder's eyes were filled with a kind of coldness, and the murderous intent quietly floated across his body. Out. Boy, I really admire your courage. You actually dare to talk to me like this. But you will regret it later. I can guarantee that I will take good care of you and let you feel what passion is. After the third elder Tais Hang finished speaking, he suddenly jumped up. He stood high in the void, a bit of cold murderous intent flashed in his eyes, and then he suddenly turned toward Lin Yu. Bian rushed over. Although it seemed that the third elder Tai's Hang was moving at this time, it was actually the spirit of the divine dragon that was moving. The spirit of the divine dragon twisted its body into an extremely strange posture. Lin Yu just felt the power of the heaven and earth around him. Suddenly, a violent force suddenly invaded towards him. That violent and domineering power made people feel fearful. After Lin Yu saw this scene, he couldn't help but take a deep breath. He used his own hands to form a talisman that could communicate with heaven and earth as described in the dragon control technique. The sigil looked extremely mysterious and obscure, but the lines were very simple. There are countless people who can see this line, but no one can really follow this line and completely outline this line. Lin Yu took a deep breath and calmed down his mood a little. The third elder didn't feel how powerful this talisman was, so the corner of his mouth curled up into a sneer. He turned his head and glanced at Lin Yu, his eyes full of contempt and ridicule. I thought you were so powerful, but in the end you just drew such a useless talisman. It's so ridiculous to say it. When Lin Yu heard the third elder saying this, he suddenly laughed without any warning. He laughed happily, as if he had heard the funniest joke in the world, laughing wildly. Ha ha ha, it's so ridiculous, it's so ridiculous. This talisman may be useless to you, but it may not be useful to him. After hearing Lin Yu's words, the third elder's pupils suddenly enlarged, and a bit of disbelief flashed in his eyes. At this time, he seemed to have remembered something. Impossible, absolutely impossible. Lin Yu's lips curved into a sneer. Nothing is impossible, there will be surprises, believe me. Lin Yu suddenly took a step forward. He pointed lightly at the forehead of the dragon spirit. Then he bit the tip of his tongue and spit out a mouthful of blood. The body of the dragon spirit suddenly began to shake violently. Stand up! The third elder who was standing on the dragon head was suddenly thrown out by the dragon spirit. The third elder Tai's Hang drew a beautiful parabola in the air, and finally fell heavily to the ground. At this moment, the third elder Tai's Hang spurted a mouthful of blood, and his eyes were full of fear. A sneer appeared at the corner of Lin Yu's lips. He suddenly took a step forward, and then the aura from his body pressed down on the third elder. The third elder felt that his connection with the spirit of the dragon was gradually increasing. Reduce. The third elder, who looked complacent at first, suddenly felt a bit frightened in his eyes. The third elder's face began to look ugly, and he couldn't help but shake his head crazily. Impossible, this is absolutely impossible. What kind of conspiracy did you use just now? You actually. The third elder stretched out his hand and pointed at Lin Yu. At this time, Lin Yu suddenly laughed. A dragon roar permeated the heaven and earth. The surrounding beasts all felt a little trembling. Only the space-time beast stood in the air alone. He just glanced at the dragon spirit casually, and there was a bit of displeasure in his eyes. Why are you showing off here? You entered later, so you should be the younger brother, understand? Hurry up and call me brother. After hearing what the space-time beast said, everyone looked at each other. They never thought that this domain master level beast would like to joke so much. At this time, everyone was also surprised, staring wide-eyed, opening their mouths, and a bit of complexity flashed in their eyes. The spirit of the divine dragon just let out a sudden dragon roar, as if expressing its dissatisfaction, but everyone could also clearly feel that the spirit of the divine dragon seemed to be a little stronger than before, but also a little weaker. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chang. Chapter 105. At this moment, the third elder Tai's Hang seemed to have lost his soul. He collapsed directly on the ground, his eyes full of helplessness, and the corners of his mouth also raised a bit of a wry smile. Why? Why do you do this? Why do you want to take away my dragon spirit? I want to kill you, I must kill you, I want to kill you now. The third elder suddenly rushed towards Lin Yu. At this moment, he was like a madman in the rain. He just turned slightly to the side and directly avoided the third elder. At this time, Lin Yu suddenly smiled. A bit of coldness flashed in his eyes, and a bit of cold murderous intent emerged from his body. Weren't you still very arrogant just now? Why are you like this now? It's ridiculous to say it. I think if the two of us were exchanged now, I would definitely die by your hands, but now I won't kill you. Maybe this is the difference between the two of us. Lin Yu spoke every word and gritted his teeth. At this time, the third elder was slumped on the ground. His eyes were blank and his pupils suddenly enlarged. At this time, he was shaking his head and laughing like crazy. With "Ha ha ha, okay, very good, very good. You might as well kill me now. If you kill me now, it will really be over. If you don't kill me now, it will just be endless torture for me. So I beg you, please kill me quickly, please kill me quickly, you should do it." The third elder's eyes were fixed on Lin Yu. At this moment, Lin Yu just glanced at the third elder coldly, and then pushed him out with a wave of his hand. "Now you are not qualified to ask me to do things, and you don't even think about it. Who do you think you are? If you have any sense, get out of here, or else you will suffer." Lin Yu was talking unhurriedly, and at this time, the third elder was slumped on the ground, with a look of helplessness in his eyes, and a wry smile on his lips. At this moment, Lin Yu came to Master Ziling and the Great Elder. Now that the entire Tianji sect saw Lin Yu like this, a bit of respect flashed in their eyes. "I have to thank you two for what happened just now. If you two hadn't delayed enough time to allow my space-time harvester to advance, I'm afraid the outcome of the matter is still unknown." Master Ziling and the Great Elder heard Lin Yu's words. After saying this, there were some complicated colors in their eyes, and then they also smiled like this. "It's a joke, it's a joke. To put it into detail, I have to thank you. If it hadn't been for you this time, I'm afraid we would have suffered a catastrophe during this day's gathering. We don't even know each other. I'll go to the back mountain and bring you this Beiming bear." Master Ziling's eyes were full of gratitude. When Lin Yu heard what Master Ziling said, their eyes also had quite complicated colors. Then he just waved his hands and smiled. Laugh. Since ancient times, the rule in the world is to smile when we meet, so why talk about grudges? When Master Ziling heard what Lin Yu said, he laughed out loud. "Ha ha ha, what a smile when we meet each other, why are we talking about grudges? This time it's true." At this time, the Great Elder turned his head, glanced at Master Ziling, and then gestured towards Master Ziling. At this moment, Master Ziling instantly understood what the Great Elder meant. He ha ha smile. "Ha ha ha, look at my memory, young hero, please come with me now." Of course, Lin Yu understood what Master Ziling wanted to take him to do, so he smiled like this at this time. "Good work." Lin Yu summoned the space-time beast, and the space-time beast immediately understood what Lin Yu meant. At this time, the space-time beast just took a gentle step forward, and then suddenly disappeared in front of everyone. Even though he had seen the spatial magical power of this space-time beast, the eyes of Master Ziling were full of envy at this time. At this time, he could not help but raise his eyebrows slightly, and there seemed to be a twinkle in his eyes. "It's a bit complicated. It would be great if our sect could have such a strange beast. When the time comes, it will be easier to travel between continents and counties." Lin Yu suddenly laughed. "Ha ha ha, the space-time beast has its own pride, so he will not allow you to do this." After hearing what Lin Yu said, the Ziling master was stunned at first, but then he reacted, and then he nodded gently, with a bit of complexity flashing in his eyes. What the young hero said is half true. The beasts of heaven and earth are born and raised, and they should have their own pride. Ordinary people must not be able to tame them. I have heard this. When Lin Yu heard Master Zi Ling say this, he couldn't help but smile, and then nodded lightly, that's right. The two people came and arrived at the back mountain. When they arrived at the back mountain, Lin Yu felt the aura of the northern dark bear, followed by a violent tremor, and a giant white bear. The bear suddenly rushed toward Lin Yu. At this time, when Lin Yu saw the giant bear rushing towards him, the corner of Lin Yu's mouth curled up with amusement. It's interesting. It's really interesting. This big stupid bear actually wants to challenge me. Since he is so ignorant, if he doesn't succeed, it will be somewhat unjustifiable. At this time, Lin Yu summoned the dragon spirit like this, because the space-time beast was on its way to bring the three women back, and this time Lin Yu just took the opportunity to see how powerful this dragon spirit was. Sharp. When the dragon spirit appeared in the void, the movement of the Beiming bear suddenly stopped. He fell directly in front of Lin Yu with one kill. At this moment, the Beiming bear clearly had a problem. A feeling of ups and downs. The dragon spirit just glared coldly at Beiming Xiang. Beimingjian's legs weakened and he fell to the ground directly under the pressure from his bloodline. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Chang. Chapter 106. Beiming Xiang was trembling all over, and his eyes were full of a sense of fear. At this time, the dragon spirit also had a bit of a sneer on his lips, and his eyes were full of a look from the dragon clan to ordinary people. The contempt of living beings, the dragon clan is the natural king among the strange beasts. Especially the divine dragon spirit, that is even more true. If the king among the kings had not suddenly retreated from the realm of the governor's divine dragon spirit, I am afraid that now, this divine dragon spirit would have already stepped into the legendary beast. According to legend, after reaching the transformation state, this strange beast can no longer be controlled by humans. However, in these millions of years, none of the strange beasts that have entered this transformation state have ever appeared. The Beiming bear lay on the ground and shivered, his eyes filled with a sense of fear. At this moment, Lin Yu suddenly took a step forward and came to the front of the Beiming bear. His eyes were straight. Goda was sizing up Beiming Xiang, with a somewhat teasing smile on his lips. I think you should also know the purpose of my coming today. Now I give you two ways, one way of life and one way of death. It depends on which one you choose. At this time, Xiang felt like crying for a while after hearing what Lin Yu said. Of course, he understood what Lin Yu meant. At this time, Xiang's eyes were staring straight at Lin Yu, with some complex colors flashing in his eyes. Lin Yu originally thought that Xiang would agree happily. At this time, Xiang seemed to have suddenly remembered something. He slowly raised his head and glanced towards Lin Yu, with complex colors seeming to flash through his eyes. I don't want to say anything else. Today I just want to ask, how are my eldest brother and third brother doing now? It's okay if you want me to surrender to you, but the premise is that my eldest brother and third brother surrender to you together. Otherwise, I will directly explode the demon pill now, and you will get nothing by then. After Lin Yu heard what Xiang said, he nodded slightly, with a bit of satisfaction in his eyes. He stared at Xiang directly. What if I said they are both dead now? After Xiang heard what Lin Yu said, the aura on his body began to surge rapidly, and the spiritual power of the world around him began to pour in towards his body. A surging force just like this, coming from all directions. At this time, Lin Yu, after seeing this scene, a bit of surprise flashed in his eyes. He never thought that Xiang had become so strong. His eyes were staring straight at him. Staring at Xiang, a somewhat complicated smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Since my eldest brother and third brother are both dead, there is no point in living alone now. Today I have made a note of it. It was you who pushed us brothers to this point. Don't worry, even if we brothers arrive, even the underworld will not let you go. At this time, Xiong was like a ball that was about to burst. Lin Yu nodded with satisfaction, and then a playful smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. That's quite a bit of loyalty. Forget it, I won't kid you. Your eldest brother is doing very well now. As for the whereabouts of your third brother, I haven't found it yet, but I guess nothing happened. When Xiong heard what Lin Yu said, his eyes were clearly wary. Are you telling the truth? Lin Yu suddenly laughed. I'm just curious, do you think I have any need to lie to you? At this time, Xiong reluctantly nodded, and then turned around and glanced coldly at Lin Yu, but I'm warning you, you'd better not lie to me. If you lie to me, I will never let you go, even if I try to die, you will be seriously injured. Xiong eyes were fixed on Lin Yu. At this moment, Lin Yu suddenly smiled. After hearing what Xiong said, he couldn't help but nodded slightly. Don't worry, I will definitely do what I promised you, so just keep it in your heart. Xiong still looked at Lin Yu warily for a moment, and then nodded slightly. Okay, in that case, I will trust you again. At this time, Lin Yu's eyes flashed with confusion, because according to his opinion, the three women should have been brought back by the space-time beast a long time ago, but now the three women have still nowhere to be found. At this time, Lin Yu's eyes narrowed to a slit, a bit of confusion flashed in his eyes, and he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows slightly. What's going on with the three of them now? Why haven't they come back yet? But at this moment, in the void, a huge space-time wormhole suddenly appeared. At this time, the space-time beast suddenly emerged, with a bit of fear in its eyes. Lin Yu really didn't expect something that could frighten the space-time beast. At this time, the space-time beast suddenly took a step forward. He turned his head and glanced at Lin Yu. He also took a deep breath and managed to calm down his mood. It looks like I have to talk to you about something, but you'd better be prepared. After Lin Yu heard what the space-time beast said, he turned around and looked at the space-time beast, with a complex look in his eyes. What happened? Tell me in detail. At this time, the space-time beast calmed down a little. He turned around and looked at Lin Yu. This Tianya Valley was captured by someone. As for where they are now, I haven't found them for a long time. After hearing what the space-time beast said, Lin Yu's pupils suddenly enlarged, and there was a bit of surprise in his eyes. He took a deep breath, calmed down a little, and then turned around and looked at the space-time beast. What happened? Who did this? Who is it? And who captured this Tianya Valley? Lin Yu's eyes were fixed on the space-time beast. At this time, the space-time beast even felt the murderous intent on Lin Yu's body. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 107. At this time, the violent trembling in the distance began to become more and more obvious, but after a moment, the trembling in the distance suddenly disappeared at this time. It started to calm down slowly. Lin Yu looked into the distance, and after just a cold glance, some complex colors flashed in his eyes. At this time, a somewhat playful smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and his eyes became more intense. There was a flash of playfulness. It's interesting, it's really interesting. This power is really interesting, but it seems that there will still be some time before this rare treasure is born. This time, I will go to the Tianya drum first. I want to see which one it is. How dare you do such a thing, you bastard with long eyes. Lin Yu's fists clenched and he gritted his teeth. The cold murderous intent in his eyes also began to quietly emerge. And at this moment, a person in the distance suddenly rushed straight towards him. His speed was extremely fast, and he had already arrived somewhere in just one breath. Master Zi Ling and the Great Elder looked at Lin Yu's retreating back, and a few complex colors flashed in their eyes. Then, they couldn't help but frown slightly, and there seemed to be some emotions in their eyes. Special colors. Just a moment later, Lin Yu had already arrived at the top of the Tianya Valley on his space-time beast. You must know that Tianya Valley has been a neutral force since ancient times. No one will come and have the idea of Tianya Valley, but now everything seems to be a little different. When Lin Yu thought of this, some complicated colors seemed to flash through his eyes, and then he couldn't help but frown slightly. The leader of the other side is very powerful. In my opinion, we should be more careful. After finding out the situation clearly, we can know ourselves and the enemy, and we will never be in danger in 100 battles. After hearing what the space-time beast said, Lin Yu thought for a moment and then nodded gently. Okay, if that's the case, then you can go back first and leave everything to me. A meaningful smile appeared at the corner of Lin Yu's mouth. At this time, after hearing what Lin Yu said, the space-time beast thought about it and wanted to say something at that time, but Lian Tian just faced him. After taking a glance, the space-time beast took the initiative to shut up. But at this moment, a mysterious and powerful force suddenly lingered in the surrounding heaven and earth. There seemed to be some evil in this force. When Lin Yu felt this evil power, he couldn't help but half squinted his eyes. It seems that this is an evil cultivator. Why is their aura somewhat similar to that of the guys from the Wuji sect? What's going on? At this moment, Lin Yu was as confused as the 2-foot-tall monk, and just a moment later, it was as if a thin layer of mist suddenly rose up between the sky and the earth. In the Tianya Valley, a man held a beautiful woman in his arms. The man's hands were not honest, and he was exploring the woman's body back and forth. The corners of the man's mouth raised a somewhat evil smile, and the woman was obviously a little bit evil. He was reluctant, but there was nothing he could do. The man turned his head and glanced coldly at the person in front of him. There seemed to be a bit of coldness in his eyes. At this moment, several people ran up in a panic. There was a bit of fear in the eyes of those people, and they did not dare to look directly at the man in front of them. Sorry, Your Majesty, we are late. A special color flashed in the man's eyes, and then he glanced coldly at the guys in front of him, with a slight sneer at the corner of his mouth. Not to mention the delay, I just want to ask you, have you found those women? The man had a fat head and big ears, and the fat on his face was trembling. He just glanced coldly at the man in front of him, and there seemed to be a bit of coldness flashing in his eyes. After seeing him like this, the man's pupils suddenly enlarged, a forced smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and a hint of helplessness flashed in his eyes. Lord Qi, we haven't found them yet. Those women are very cunning. We don't even know where they have walked. We can't find even half of them. There was a flash of coldness in Chen Jiang's eyes, and the murderous intent in his body was suddenly released without reservation. When the man kneeling on the ground felt Chen Jiang's murderous intent, his pupils suddenly widened. A bit of helplessness flashed in his eyes, and a wry smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Master Qi, what I said is absolutely true, and there is absolutely no falsehood. These little girls are also a bit cunning. We don't have any solution, but we are now pursuing them with all our strength. Once they are found, if there is any news about their whereabouts, I will tell you their whereabouts and news as soon as possible. Chen Jiang suddenly sneered at the corner of his mouth. In the man's eyes, Chen Jiang's smile was like a vicious dog from hell. The man subconsciously took several steps back, and then he couldn't help swallowing his saliva. Sir, please calm down, please calm down. The man's voice had trembled slightly, and at this time, after hearing what the guy said, Chen Jiang also smiled teasingly at the corner of his mouth. Interesting, it's really interesting, but some things can't be explained, but I hate a kind of people the most. I think you should know that is, the kind of people who promised to do something but didn't do it. I hate this kind of people the most. Chen Zhang gritted his teeth and paused, staring at the man kneeling on the ground. At this moment, the man kneeling on the ground, after hearing what Chen Zhang said, a few surprises flashed in his eyes. Just as he was about to get up and run away, Chen Zhang suddenly flew forward, and then with a powerful force, he completely crushed the man into pieces. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 108. At this time, Chen Jiang's mouth had a somewhat playful smile, and a hint of amusement flashed through his eyes. He just glanced coldly at the pool of blood on the ground in front of him. He glanced at him, his eyes full of mockery and sarcasm. The thing has not been done, and now you are still licking your face and dare to come back to me. Do you really think that I am easy to mess with? It is ridiculous to say it, it is simply ridiculous, stupid guy. After Chen Zhang finished speaking, he stood up suddenly, and then walked towards the distance. At this time, Lin Yu also tried to sneak in quietly. At this time, Lin Yu's figure was like a ghost, walking quietly in the darkness. He suddenly discovered that there were countless soldiers in Tianya Valley looking for Luo back and forth, but these soldiers were like the walking dead, they had no souls at all, and all the words that flashed out of a certain word were a numb look. These soldiers seemed to have lost their souls. After Lin Yu saw this scene, he couldn't help but feel a little surprised. At this time, he half squinted his eyes, and a little confusion flashed in his eyes. It's strange, it's really strange. Why do these guys look like the walking dead? What's going on? When Lin Yu thought of this, he couldn't help but frown slightly at this moment, and there was a bit of complexity in his eyes. At this moment, a figure suddenly appeared. The figure appeared directly behind Lin Yu. Lin Yu was suddenly startled, and then turned around and faced that person. This side suddenly punched me. When the man saw Lin Yu like this, a teasing smile appeared at the corner of his mouth, and then he turned slightly to the side to avoid Lin Yu's attack. After a moment, that person the man turned around and kicked Lin Yu in the chest. Lin Yu suddenly flew backwards, and finally fell heavily to the ground. A cold look flashed in his eyes. The man wore a faceless mask. At this moment, he suddenly spoke. I originally thought you had some abilities, but now it seems that you are nothing more than that. Your strength is simply not worth mentioning, and you are even more vulnerable. After Lin Yu heard what the man said, a bit of coldness flashed in his eyes. At this moment, his eyes were staring straight at that guy. Who are you? Being able to appear behind my back without anyone noticing, and plotting against me, is enough. You have some abilities, but it's just a pity that you are a guy who doesn't even dare to show his true face. It's a bit ridiculous how much you get. Lin Yu's eyes were staring straight at that guy, his eyes full of contempt and disdain. After hearing what Lin Yu said, that guy also had a sneer at the corner of his mouth. His eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, and the murderous intention in his body began to quietly emerge. Boy, don't blame me for not warning you. Do you think you will be my opponent? If I wanted to kill you or had any hostility towards you, you would be dead by now. As for me bringing this, the mask is just that you can't know my identity for the time being. After hearing what the guy said, Lin Yu felt a little confused in his eyes. He stared at the man with a sneer on his lips. Asshole, who do you think you are? It's simply ridiculous. I don't know what I am, but I only know one thing. If I want to kill you, it will probably be very simple. Lin Yu took a deep breath, calmed down his mood a little, and then stood up suddenly, and then he stood directly in the air. At this time, Lin Yu wanted to summon the dragon spirit, because he knew very well that apart from the dragon spirit, the space-time beast and the earth-shaking bear might not even be qualified to be this guy's opponent. And the man seemed to understand Lin Yu's plan. If you want to alert the snake, or want to give up your 3 little girlfriends, then you can do it, I won't mind. After Lin Yu heard what the man said, a complicated color seemed to flash through his eyes, and then a playful smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. How can I trust you? Although Lin Yu's expression seemed quite casual and his tone was extremely calm, there was indeed a storm in his heart. At this moment, he desperately hoped that what this man said was indeed true. After the man heard what Lin Yu said, there was a bit of sneer on the corner of his mouth. His eyes were staring at Lin Yu, and there seemed to be a flash of something in his eyes. Play with it? You don't have to believe this, but I dare to bet you that if you don't believe it, you will regret it, I swear. The man's eyes were fixed on Lin Yu. At this moment, Lin Yu was also entangled for a while. After a while, he turned his head and glanced at the man. What do you want? Come on, tell me, I don't want to talk nonsense to you. After hearing what Lin Yu said, the man couldn't help but laugh. It would have been better if it was like this earlier. If you were like this earlier, how could it be so troublesome? I still say the same thing, what do you want? It's better not to beat around the bush here. Lin Yu's eyes were quite cold, and his tone was even colder. After hearing what Lin Yu said, the man took a deep breath and calmed down a little. It's actually very simple, you just need to help me kill Chen Zhang. Chen Zhang? Who is Chen Zhang? You are so strong, why don't you go by yourself? Why do you have to rely on me? Lin Yu's eyes stared at the man, and there seemed to be a bit of coldness in his eyes. After hearing what Lin Yu said, the man also sneered at the corner of his mouth. Of course I have some special reasons, so it's inconvenient for me to do it. Of course you don't have to do it, but I can guarantee that you will never see those 3 women in your life. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 109. At this time, Lin Yu heard it. After the man said this, his eyes were full of unwillingness. He stared at the man with a cold light flashing in his eyes. A teasing smile appeared at the corner of the man's mouth. Looking at you like this, you seem a little unconvinced. At this time, after Lin Yu heard the man say this, his fists clenched and rattled. His eyes were staring at the man, and the murderous intention in his body suddenly began to invade. Come. Even that man had to admit that the murderous intention in Lin Yu at this moment was too pure. He turned his head and glanced at Lin Yu, and the corners of his mouth were also raised a little. Sneer. Why, do you still dare to attack me now? I advise you to think carefully and don't do anything stupid. The man spoke unhurriedly, and a moment later, Lin Yu suddenly took a step forward. At this moment, Lin Yu still gave up his momentum, and it disappeared all of a sudden. At this time, he just turned his head coldly and glanced at the man, with a flash in his eyes. A somewhat special color. You win, tell me, what do you want to do this time? After you kill someone for me, I will tell you everything I know, but you must act quickly. If you cannot find the person because of your own negligence, you will not be able to blame me. The man spoke unhurriedly like this. Although the beauty was unwilling to do so, she had no choice but to leave the place in a flash. After the man left, Lin Yu stared at his back with burning eyes. A very special color flashed in his eyes. After a moment, Lin Yu also had a wry smile on his lips, this kind of feeling of being controlled by others. But it's really uncomfortable, it seems I need to further improve my strength again. After Lin Yu thought of this, there was a certain determination in his eyes. At this time, his eyes were burning and his eyes were like torches. The man looked at Lin Yu's back from a distance, with a somewhat complicated look in his eyes. Who knows where this little guy will go in the future? I'm really curious, but it's a pity. It's really not a wise move to be burdened by love words all the time. After the man said this, he suddenly disappeared from the spot. At this moment, Lin Yu sneaked into the Tianya Valley like a ghost, and the guards could not detect him at all. Just a moment later, Lin Yu arrived at Tianya Altar, the center of Tianya Valley, and that guy should also be in Tianya Altar. A man with a fat head and big ears just held a beautiful woman in his arms, and his hands began to be dishonest, and he did whatever he wanted on the beautiful woman's body. At this moment, the woman was also infinitely shy, but there was also disgust in the depths of her eyes. But even though she was full of disgust, the woman still did not dare to show any signs, and she was still there laughing with him. At this time, the door outside was pushed open, and then a soldier ran in a panic. There was a bit of panic in the soldier's eyes. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty, I was delayed for a while on the way, so I ask for your forgiveness." At this time, after Chen Zhang heard what they said, a bit of coldness flashed in his eyes, and the killing intent in his body was released without reservation at this time. Chen Jiang's eyes were staring straight at him. The poor guy in front of him had a cold murderous intent in his eyes. The guy subconsciously took a few steps back, his eyes full of indescribable pain. The two people looked at each other. After this moment, Chen Zhang suddenly spoke. "I'm too lazy to talk to you about such nonsense. How did you go about the things you did? If you didn't do it well, what would be your end? I think you should understand it too." Chen Zhang just spoke unhurriedly, his words were even more cold, and the murderous intention on his body quietly surfaced. But at this moment, a layer of dense cold sweat broke out on the man's forehead, and there was a bitter smile on the corner of his mouth. His eyes were even more evasive, and he did not dare to look at Chen Zhang. "Could it be that you haven't finished what I've assigned you yet? You should know that what I hate most is the kind of waste that can't do anything. So, can you go and die now?" After Chen Zhang finished speaking, a black turbid air suddenly spurted out from his body. This black turbid air completely enveloped those poor guys. Live. The black turbid air enveloped these guys, and in just this moment, those poor guys lost their lives. At this moment, after seeing this scene, Chen Jiang's eyes flashed with a bit of coldness, and there was no trace of brilliance. There was only a bit of teasing in his eyes. "It's interesting. These guys are really interesting. It's really boring to die so easily. But even though it's boring, it's still a bit fun." He directly embraced the woman in his arms. The woman was frightened by his appearance, but she didn't even dare to breathe, just let him do it. At this time, Lin Yu came to this place. Lin Yu looked at everything in front of him, and saw the turbid air lingering above the hall. The turbid air gradually drifted towards the void and began to slowly dissipate. At this time, Lin Yu saw this scene, and his eyes flashed a bit of solemnity. "Oh no, why did it become like this now? It's really quite tricky." At this time, Lin Yu was also struggling whether he should take action, but at this time, Lin Yu suddenly remembered the annoying guy just now. His eyes flashed a bit of special colors, and then he clenched his fists and gritted his teeth. "Forget it, fight him." After Lin Yu said this, he rushed out suddenly, and his speed was extremely fast. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 110. At this time, Lin Yu came to the main hall. Chen Zhang suddenly opened his eyes. Of course he felt Lin Yu's aura at this moment. At this moment, his eyes flashed with a bit of coldness, and the murderous feeling on his body flashed. The meaning also emerged quietly. "Asshole, I didn't expect that someone actually dared to come to me for trouble. This kid really doesn't know how high the sky is, but it's a good thing. I just let him see how high and thick the sky is." There was a bit of coldness in Chen Jiang's eyes, and the murderous intention in his body emerged even more. But at this moment, he looked at the yin-yang guard behind him, and a slight sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth. "You can't kill a chicken with a bull's knife. You two should go take a look first and see how much this kid is capable of. Come back and report to me. At this time, Chen Jiang's tone did not contain any waves, and his words were even more cold. The yin and yang guards looked at each other like this, with a bit of cold murderous intent flashing in their eyes, and the momentum on their bodies also quietly emanated. Let's go right now. There was no wave in the yin-yang guard's tone, just like the machine. At this moment, Chen Jiang just waved his hand casually, go ahead, just be neat with your movements. The yin and yang guards turned into two rays of light, one black and one white, and rushed outside. Their speed was extremely fast. In just one breath, they had already arrived here. Outside the door. At this moment, their eyes were staring straight at Lin Yu. At this moment, Lin Yu's fighting spirit was overwhelming, and the corner of his mouth was even more twitching into a sneer. I didn't expect that your master would actually send you here to die. It's ridiculous that your master himself doesn't dare to step forward. The yin and yang guards did not reply after hearing what Lin Yu said. At this time, they just suddenly transformed into the two beasts of yin and yang. Alien Beast, Lord of the Yin Beast Domain Level 6, Level 49. Qualification, Alien, Advanced. Life, 999999988. Speed, 999999988. Defense, 999999988. Attack, 999999988. Skills, Chaos Breath, Destruction of Heaven and Earth, Yin and Yang Qi, Endless Universe. Chaos Breath, the common skill of the yin and yang beasts. The two beasts exhale a breath of turbid air at the same time. What the yin beast exhales is yin energy. This yin and yang energy can corrode all the power between heaven and earth. Destroy the heaven and the earth. The two beasts of yin and yang merge into one. The two beasts of yin and yang can circle a territory of 10 feet in radius and completely destroy it. They are extremely domineering. Two chi of yin and yang, the yin beast activates its skills, and the two beasts merge into one, and together they exhale a breath of yin and yang energy. This yin and yang energy can dissolve all kinds of power in the world. Qinkanwuji, the combination of the two beasts of yin and yang can summon the disk of heaven and earth. Between heaven and earth, the disk of heaven and earth has infinite power. It can directly crush an area of heaven and earth and directly suppress an area of king level beasts. If it is destroyed, the two beasts of yin and yang will simultaneously disappear between heaven and earth, with no possibility of survival. Alien Beast, Lord of the Yang Beast Domain Level 6, Level 49. Qualification, Alien, Advanced. Life, 999999988. Speed, 999999988. Defense, 999999988. Attack, 999999988. Skills, Chaos Breath, Destruction of Heaven and Earth, Yin and Yang Qi, Endless Universe. Chaos Breath, the common skill of the yin and yang beasts. The two beasts exhale a breath of turbid air at the same time. What the yang beast exhales is yang energy. This yin and yang energy can corrode all the power between heaven and earth. Destroy the heaven and the earth. The two beasts of yin and yang merge into one. The two beasts of yin and yang can circle a territory of 10 feet in radius and completely destroy it. They are extremely domineering. Two chi of yin and yang, the yang beast activates its skills, and the two beasts merge into one, and together they exhale a breath of yin and yang energy. This yin and yang energy can dissolve all kinds of power in the world. Qinkanwuji, the combination of the two beasts of yin and yang can summon the disk of the universe between heaven and earth. The disk of universe has infinite power. It can directly crush an area of heaven and earth and directly suppress an area of king level alien beasts. If it is destroyed, the two beasts of yin and yang will simultaneously disappear between heaven and earth, with no possibility of survival. After Lin Yu saw this, a teasing smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and a trace of amusement flashed in his eyes. At this time, he also nodded slightly. Nod. It's interesting. I didn't expect that the two beasts of yin and yang in the legend would be subdued by such a villain. This really surprised me, but it's not a bad idea. I will just kill you and get rid of you of. After Lin Yu finished speaking, he suddenly stood up in the sky. He stood high in the void, and then immediately summoned the dragon spirit. After seeing the two beasts of yin and yang, the dragon spirit couldn't help but feel a bit solemn in his eyes. Then he frowned slightly and turned his head to glance at Lin Yu. Something bad, the divine dragon spirit said in a deep voice, and at this time, after hearing what the divine dragon spirit said, Lin Yu's eyes evoked a somewhat complicated light, and then he couldn't help but frown slightly. What's going on? Tell me about it. Big deal, big deal. The eyes of the spirit of the dragon narrowed into a slit, and his eyes stared at the yin-yang beasts. He didn't know why the yin-yang beasts. At this time, he felt that the big guy in front of him seemed to be somewhat familiar, and seemed to be somewhat unfamiliar. A very strange feeling suddenly appeared in the hearts of the yin-yang beasts. A moment later, the yin-yang beasts suddenly rushed towards them. A chaotic turbid air came out of the mouths of the yin-yang beasts, and the turbid air directly enveloped the spirit of the dragon and Lin Yu. However, if this turbid air was for ordinary people, it would naturally be extremely terrifying, and they might die if they touched it. But for the spirit of the dragon and Lin Yu, it was really difficult for this turbid air to hurt them. The spirit of the dragon suddenly roared, and the turbid air was directly shattered. And Lin Yu suddenly took a step forward and then completely dispersed the turbid air. After all, the level of the dragon spirit is extremely high now, so such an attack is like tickling to them.